It's been said that sport has the power to transcend the boundaries of sex, race, and religion, and even nationality. So why are women's sports relegated to the back pages of the sports section and almost non-existent television coverage? And how do we level the playing field so women score higher in the gender game in sport? I'm Dana Lewis. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. Since the 2012 London Olympics, 750,000 adults have been inspired to take up team sports in the UK. 500,000 of them were women. There are now more women playing college sports in the US than at any time in the last 35 years. So why isn't there more coverage of women's sports in the media? Insight's Emma Birchley takes a look.
In the world of women's sport, stars don't come much bigger than Serena Williams. And few faces in athletics are more familiar than Britain's Jessica Ennis-Hill. But how many people could name this woman, arguably the globe's greatest female footballer, Carly Lloyd, or swimmer Katie Ledecky, 5 times Olympic gold medalist and 9 times world champion? In fact, tennis is one of the only sports where coverage comes close to that for men.
I think women, the top women of the day, 3 or 4 decades ago, actually took the sport by the scruff of the neck and said that, hey, we want equality here. We're not getting a fair slice of the cake. The Women's Tennis Association was sort of born. They had women, top women players fight in their corner, and then we could see that, prize money became more equal. Certainly TV coverage when you look at tournaments like Wimbledon, but there's a parity there with the coverage. But I still think things like the French Open, which are massive tournaments, the Australian and the US Open, still don't have the same coverage for women that they do for the men.
But tennis is still leagues ahead of most other sports when it comes to media interest. In the UK, only around 10% of televised sports coverage is dedicated to women's sports, while the figure is just under 9% in Australia, down on a decade ago. And in the United States, the amount of TV sports programming focusing on women has fallen to just 3%. It's despite the fact that more women than ever are participating themselves. At Hampstead Football Club's midweek training session in London, these first-team players know that even if they make it to the very top of the women's game, there's little chance of much publicity, and that doesn't help encourage new talent.
I think it has a massive effect because girls not having the strong influences and role models won't encourage them to play football or play any sport for that matter. There's only a few role models that I can think of that are female that are really inspirational that people know about.
It's quite, degrading sometimes, I guess. You always see the men's sports, and even if you do see the women's, it's always like a minimal amount and always not the best coverage, I suppose. So it's quite hard sometimes, especially as well if you're looking for inspiration, you don't always get much.
Obviously there's different physicalities between men and women. You're not going to run as fast, you're not going to shoot as hard, but you can still have the footballing mind, and they don't really see it that way, I think.
The question is whether people would actually watch it if it was on. Major global events like the 2012 Olympics, hosted at Stratford in East London, might get viewers tuning in their millions to watch stars, both male and female, perform. But once it all settles back down, day-to-day coverage remains as weighted towards men as ever. One argument is it's simply a matter of supply and demand. Women's sports aren't as popular amongst viewers, so why should they have equal airtime? Without increasing the amount of women's sport in the media, though, the question is how you boost that popularity and in turn encourage more investment. Research a couple of years back revealed women's sport received less than 0.5% of all sponsorship deals in the UK. Moves are being made in the right direction by some TV stations, but not fast enough, according to football coach Gabe John.
I think there are a number of places that are aiming to try and get more female sport on TV, but they're still very undervalued and underappreciated, and they tend to be slots that are really late at night, not peak profile times, and I think they could do a lot more to showcase that.
The vast majority of sports editors are also men, which some argue doesn't help. In the States, for example, the figure is 90%.
I think until we get people in positions of influence in the sporting world, in TV production, at the heads of governing bodies of sport, I think what I would like to see a much quicker trend is still going to be moving at a snail's pace.
From taekwondo to track cycling, the skill and athleticism on display by women is undoubtedly a spectacle to be witnessed. But when it comes to having the opportunity to tune in and watch, it's still a long way from a level playing field. Emma Birchley reporting for Insight.
And Insight's Emma Birchley also went to speak to the former England rugby player Maggie Alphonse, who says, just watch women's rugby and you'll agree it's fast, hard-hitting and worth seeing.
Why is it that we're still talking about this in the 21st century, do you think?
In a way, it's quite positive that we're talking about it, because there was a point where we probably didn't, and it wasn't really a discussion that we would have. It would very much be brushed underneath the carpet. Now, I think media, broadcasters are starting to realise that we need to ensure that we get more women in front of the camera. We're talking about more women's sport, women's issues, and there's been a real big push. We're not necessarily there yet where we want to be, but I like to think the steps to get to where we want to be are increasing and improving.
What do you do about the problem that if you're not actually showing women's sport on the television, you're not going to increase popularity and therefore you don't get the investment and the sponsorship?
I think it's very much people taking the risk, taking that step forward and going, we'll cover it. And then now other sponsors, other broadcasters are going, well, the opportunities are there. Audience do want to watch it. I mean, the Women's Football World Cup, I mean, the crowds and the fans and the interest that they had was huge. So, you know, there's financial rewards in the sports.
There was a time when you talked about women in sport, it was very much the beautiful player or she's a mother and how does she fit it in, all these kind of references. How much do you think that was a problem? How much do you think it's changed?
If I'm honest, it probably still is a problem in terms of the use of terminology, the language used to describe, I guess, a female athlete rather than talking about their sporting prowess. We saw a lot of it in the Olympic Games in 2016 out in Rio. A lot of the journalism that was used was to first start, when they talked about an athlete, was about their motherhood, was about, I guess, their appearance rather than their actual athletic ability. What was interesting, though, when the Olympics was going on, that was being brought up and people were identifying it and calling it out, which we never used to have. You know, 2012, I know it's such a long time ago, but I don't think people really brought that information up. And now people are checking and challenging it. And I like to think that the words and the way we describe female athletes has changed. Still a long way to go. I think we still see it on the front of papers, you know, criticising what a female athlete is wearing rather than using the words of strong, athletic, impressive, as opposed to other certain words which wouldn't necessarily you'd use for the male athletes.
What do you say to people who think that, you know, female sport isn't dynamic, therefore isn't worth watching?
Yeah, so to the guys who may have comments which may be quite negative in regards to women's sport, I would say just watch it. So we used to get a lot of people watch the men's rugby and would play after them. So they'd watch England versus New Zealand and the women's match would be straight after that. And I'd always say, just watch the first half. Watch the first half. And they'd say and watch the first half and they would absolutely love it. The tackles are exactly the same, they're big hits. You know, the kicking of the ball, the passing of the ball, exactly the same with the guys. Whatever standard they may perceive it to be, when they watch it for themselves, they almost get a better appreciation of it. The challenge that we have is trying to get more women to watch women play, and that's where the issues come. And how we do that, that's the next big step. I guess the key thing, I think, is trying to get more of the youngsters in to really start following women's sport, because that's where they start to sort of make their decisions on what they think is considered to be watchable. At the moment, I think they're so obsessed with maybe watching men's football because they see that on a regular basis. For those who would have watched the Olympics in 2016, the women's hockey final. I mean, absolutely brilliant to see how the Great Britain hockey team did. I mean, that, whether it doesn't matter whether you're watching men or women, that was just a great game of hockey, and I'm not a hockey fan. So I always want to say, you just see talented athletes at their very best. When you see Nicola Adams from Great Britain compete in boxing, she's got a hat on. You don't know whether it's a male or a woman because you just see really good athlete. And I think that's what I would say to people. Just watch the sport and see it for its ability and the skill level rather than judging it on a gender.
What difference do you think it makes having females like you commentating on top-level sport?
Being the first female, I guess, commentating on men's rugby over in the UK has been huge. I think the fact that people have been able to see that, it doesn't matter what gender you are, if you know the sport very well and you have expertise and knowledge in the area, you're confident and comfortable enough to talk about it. I think it takes time for people to understand that, I'm probably new to the scene. What's great, I've won a Women's Rugby World Cup. I've been in the sport for 25 years, so I've got good expertise, but I think for the audience, it's getting used to another voice. So it's hearing a woman's voice especially. So when they now hear that and they see me quite regularly, they very much understand, she knows what she's talking about, she's been there, I'm ready to listen. And I think that's what's been the change, the progress.
What do you think needs to be done now to try and create some form of parity when it comes to male and female sport?
Parity is quite a big word to use in terms of trying to get that equality in the same level of coverage that the men get in the women's sport. I'd love to say it would be very soon. The reality is it probably won't be. Times are changing. We are starting to see more women's sport on TV, women's football, cricket, rugby, you name it. It's now starting to be shown, but I think we're still far away. But I do want to see and encourage more people to keep pushing the issue, because the more women's sport we can show on TV, the more women we have in front of the camera as commentators and pundits, as well as behind the camera as producers, directors and so on, the greater diversity we'll have in front of the screen for the fans to watch and appreciate.
This is Inside. Stay with us. In just a moment, we'll continue our discussion on women in sport.